from Washington, D.C., and Republican strategist and former McCain presidential campaign advisor, Boris Epshteyn, joining us in the studio. Good to have you both with us. Thanks very much for joining us. We know we are talking about upwards of 20-plus deaths here on this terrorist attack. Does this change, you think, what you are expecting at the voting booth today in Arizona and Utah?
Not in Arizona. I was expecting a big win by Trump. He's up by 13 in the polls, and it's sad to say on a day like this, a morning like this, it definitely helps Trump in the polls. It underscores his message of strong national defense. And it hurts Cruz because he's been so wishy-washy on national defense in the past, wanting to cut national defense. So in Arizona, Trump is overwhelmingly likely to win. In Utah, caucus state, very religious state, will be strong for Cruz. So most likely, no immediate change going forward. Continues to be good for Trump in California. Continues to be good for Trump in New York. So it's not a game changer, but does sort of give Trump more fodder to talk about and underscores his position on terrorism and anti-terrorism, talking about what we can do because we do seem sort of defenseless, just like Europe.
Betsy Woodruff, what about that? Do we have any reaction from your standpoint from U.S. officials, and how does this play out in the polls today?
I think in terms of polls, Boris is probably right. It's unlikely to change the outcome in the Arizona and Utah contests. That said, for context, it's important to bear in mind just how much long-term that this can help candidates like Donald Trump. And part of the reason for that is that during times when people are concerned about terrorism, they prefer candidates who are louder, who are more masculine, who come across as more strong, and especially candidates who talk about immigration and can capitalize on some of those concerns. A CNN poll from December that came in the wake of the San Bernardino and Paris attacks showed that 40% of respondents thought terrorists were actually winning globally. That's more than 15 percentage points higher than the previous record high in that poll, which came in August of 2005. As these fears foment, as people see terrorism as something that is more likely to impact their lives, and as they see immigration as something that's connected to terrorism, if that's a perception that emerges, without a doubt, that absolutely helps Trump. And remember, we don't have any more Republican contests for a couple of weeks. So if this helps him, if this keeps him getting momentum, it's an upside for him. I feel a little craven saying that, but those are the facts.
We are checking the Twitter files of the candidates to see if there's any reaction. Jacob McDowell.
There hasn't been one reaction, not on Twitter, from Donald Trump, John
Nothing
Kasich,
from Ted Cruz,
Hillary Clinton, or Bernie Sanders.
Okay,
so the five remaining, no
reaction so far this morning.
Yeah, there's going to be. And you have to. I mean, as Betsy was saying, as Boris was saying, you have to think this plays into this general sense of insecurity that seems to be driving so much political sentiment in this election season. Economic insecurity, social insecurity, and of course national insecurity, and indeed personal insecurity. And the person who probably is most benefiting, if we can put it in those terms, from this great sense of the country being the country and indeed the West, or those of us who kind of believe in Western values, being under siege is probably Donald Trump.
And we should point out that the president is in Cuba.
Right.
We have not heard from President Obama on this so far. He is on the ground in Cuba. Yes, go ahead, Boris.
It's not just optics also, right? This is real. Over 20 people have died in Belgium. Belgium had been on complete lockdown days after the November attacks in Paris, so they expected this. Then you had this arrest 4 days ago, as you've been talking about. This is not just perception. This is reality.
But
so we as Americans have to realize that what's happening in Europe could be happening here. You mentioned over 1,000 people in America have done what people in Europe done, gone to a Middle East train and came back.
The investigations are 1,000 investigations about people who may have joined the fight. Yeah.
So Donald Trump's message is going to continue to resonate, and it's a true message that we need to be strong on national security, and there's no two ways about it.
And don't forget his call for a ban on Muslims, which every single exit poll taken, and every single Republican primary has shown a huge majority of primary voters on the Republican side supports that. This is only going to be strengthened by what looks like yet another Islamist attack of dozens of people dead. Again, whatever one thinks of his argument, that we've got to just basically pull up the drawbridge, keep people out, especially Muslims, that's going to resonate again.
Some people on the left have sort of said that what the proposal was to kick people out. It is not, right? So let's just be clear, and it's important to be clear in the proposals of these candidates. What Donald Trump said is that there should be a pause on influx of people. Now, how we differentiate those folks who are coming in, we have to be careful about, but nevertheless, there's no question that our immigration authorities, Homeland authorities, have to be much stronger in finding out who comes into this country and how.
Well, this is a point that we were talking about earlier in Europe, where there is complete open borders, Jerry Baker, with the exception of Britain.
Yeah, Britain and some of the other countries, but the core European countries.
You can travel in and out.
Now, France, of course, reimposed border controls after the Paris attacks, but you have, yes, you basically can travel around, and this is a real fundamental challenge to the European Union as an institution itself, because this was core to the idea of Europe, that you would do away with these borders, people could move around. The idea was people could have freedom of movement, and you were creating essentially what was one country. That was their ultimate objective, to create one state. People are beginning to realize that, unfortunately, they still are individual countries, and they want to be able to protect themselves. And they have their own national law enforcement, their own security operations. They want to be able to protect themselves. And if you can't control your borders, you can't protect yourself.
That's right.
I just want to add to that. This is a known. These were known threats since Paris. The location of these architects of the Paris terror attacks, hiding in open sight for 4 months. You had the head of Europol saying Europe is currently facing the highest terror threat in more than a decade last month, and still authorities could not prevent these attacks. Again, you want to add to the uncertainty and the fear across the continent. This does that.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Go ahead,
so
Boris.
we've only been talking about the primary so far. This unquestionably hurts Hillary in the general. She was Secretary of State for a long time. Obama is likely going to sort of mess up the response to this. He's not been good on that in the past. He fumbled it in November with Paris. So this will hurt Hillary in the general versus Donald Trump, who's much stronger.
It will be interesting to see the president's response, because as Boris says, he really did fumble it. And,
he did.
I think he was in Turkey, and he gave that terrible response where he got much more animated and upset about the fact that people were, that Republicans were opposing Syrian, blocking Syrian refugees, and he seemed to be much more passionate and concerned about that than the fact that 130 people died on the streets.
He was completely out of it in terms of the zeitgeist of America and the zeitgeist of the people after the Paris attacks. There's no doubt about it. Boris Epshteyn and Betsy Woodruff, want to thank you very much for weighing in this morning. Very important story. And I want to bring you some updates here. Delta